Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from, and welcome back to another one of our Kneat webinars. My name is James Carey. I am the Digital Events Marketing Manager here for Kneat. If you've joined us before, welcome back. If this is your first time, we're glad to have you. Today's webinar is a partner webinar. We're here featuring one of our close partners, PwC, is here to present about how they are modernizing CSV and how AI and CSA are changing the game. So we're going to hear from a couple experts from PwC, as well as one of our own in-house experts at Kneat, talking about AI and CSA. A few things to go over before we start with that. Copyright there, but some housekeeping notes on the webinar itself. You are joining us in listen-only mode, so you don't have to worry about being on camera or talking. We do still want to hear from you, though. There is a live chat off to the right-hand side of your screen. I see a few people are already chiming in there. Hi, Shital, joining from Dubai. Kiet, I'll respond to you in a minute. And Sean, yes, this is all being recorded. I'll get to that in just a second. But that chat is active all day throughout the webinar. So go ahead and type in any comments you see. Let us know what you think about the presentation as it's going on. Yes, Sean, you will get a copy sent to your email. And feel free to engage with us in that chat. A couple other options for you. We have a live poll going on right now, a little engagement poll. So in that polling tab, you'll be able to click in there and answer that poll already. I'll come to asking that question in just a second, but you can engage with us that way. And then finally is the Q&A box. We have Q&A active throughout the presentation. So go ahead and put in your questions anytime you feel like it, anytime they come up. Put them in that Q&A box, and we'll be able to get those answered live after the presentation with our experts. But don't worry, if we run out of time, if we don't get to everything, we will still follow up with you afterwards, and I'll make sure that your questions are answered. A Kneat representative will reach out to you with the answers to those questions. So even if we're not able to get to everything live, we will still follow up with you. After the webinar, after today, because it is Thursday, this will probably be on Monday once the weekend is done. You will receive a link to this recording in your email, as well as a link to all of the slides that are shown today. So to Sean's question there, don't worry, you will get a copy to share with your colleagues, your friends, your family if you want, and the slides that you can reference back as well. As part of that, you'll receive a follow-up survey. We love to hear your feedback on how our webinars are doing, and more importantly, what topics you want to hear about in the future. After the webinar, even without that email, you can always reach out to us to ask questions about Kneat, about our webinars, or send us suggestions at info@kneat.com. That's info@kneat.com. Your feedback is important to us, and it's what drives our webinar program as we keep producing these webinars every month. So a little bit about our agenda today. We're going to go through that interactive poll, as I mentioned. We're going to talk a little bit about Kneat as a company, Kneat GX as a product, before we dive into our main presentation here and hear from our partners over at PwC about AI's impact on pharma, how AI is helping reshape CSV, and their own success story for how they're implementing AI into their digital validation processes. Finally, finishing up with that live Q&A. So let's start with our poll here. If you haven't already, click into that polling tab. We want to hear from you. Where are you on your journey to digitizing validation? This is a pretty basic question we ask in all of our webinars. Just gives us a sense of where our listeners and viewers are at in their journey, in their expertise, and their knowledge. So right now, off the start here, we've got 62% in initial discovery. That's option B. So nobody is starting out blank today. Everybody is at least starting off with some initial discovery done, some prep work done, and discussions happening. We've got about 10% about to launch their first digital validation project. And all the polls are coming in now. The numbers are moving up there. We've got about 30% that have some projects delivered digitally, and they're considering how to scale. Carla, great. Thank you for putting in D there. Make sure you click into that polling tab and submit it there as well, just so that we can track those answers. So yeah, things are adjusting out a little bit now. We have a few people starting today now, but mostly in initial discovery and considering scale. That's great. I see a lot of answers are still coming in, but we've got to move on. So I'm going to leave that poll open. Feel free to answer it anytime throughout as we get there. I want to talk a little bit about Kneat as a company and Kneat GX as a product before we move on here. So Kneat is a publicly traded company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We are a truly global company. We're headquartered in Ireland, but have operations all over the world. I myself am joining in from the East Coast of the US, just outside of Washington, D.C. But we're a global company with over 280 employees, most of those in our product development, but many still in professional services like myself. And we are the validation or we produce rather the validation platform of choice for 8 of the top 10 global pharma companies around the world, including 3 of the 4 COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers. We've got quite a number of customers, users, sites, and partners around the world, and all of those numbers are important, and the pluses are important because we are constantly growing. And that is due in no small part to our product offering here, our virtual or digital validation lifecycle management platform, Kneat GX. That is the platform that enables regulated companies to make validation of their processes easier, faster, and smarter. It's one platform that digitizes all of the paper-based validation that you are maybe used to, maybe frustrated and annoyed with. And it's one solution that works for any of those processes, many of them listed here, but many more beyond that as well. And that is why so many pharma companies around the world choose Kneat GX for their digital validation processes, because it is one platform that works for any work process. It's easy to use, easy to train, easy to scale, and it allows companies to be audit ready at any time and really enforce their data integrity and security. There's no more worries about paper-based validation, keeping and maintaining all of that paper, or searching up wet signatures when they're needed years down the line. But those aren't just our numbers. Those aren't just our points to brag about. Those are reinforced by third-party independent customer benchmarking studies using Kneat GX. There's a few numbers here I won't dive into. Safe to say, after the webinar today, if you're interested more in using Kneat GX or implementing it in your company, you can find more case studies on our website. But it all boils down to 65% fewer validation labor hours, 46% fewer process steps, and more than 40% more efficient than leading competitors in the digital validation landscape. So that's enough of the sales pitch. That's enough about Kneat and Kneat GX. Just to give you a background about what we're talking about today, more in digital validation. I know everyone wants to dive into our featured content today and hear from PwC, hear from our partners at PwC about how AI and CSA are changing the game for them. We're so glad to have Sid Pant and Anirudh Naulay here from PwC to lead a presentation. And we're also joined by Amy Wilhite. Folks who have joined our webinars before will know Amy quite well. She joins the Kneat webinars very often. She's very knowledgeable and an expert on digital validation. So these three will lead us through their presentation and give us a little bit of insight into what they're doing. Sid, Anirudh, Amy, thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you here. I'll leave the introductions to you, and I'll pass off to Sid to start with us. Thanks,
Awesome.
Sid.
Thank you so much, James. Team, very, very excited to be here. Like James said, we'll start with some quick introductions and we'll get into the meat of the discussion. My name is Sid Pant. I'm a director in PwC's digital quality and global validation practice. I have about 10 plus years of experience in end-to-end operations and digital transformations. But for the past 5 years, my focus has been on enabling compliant digital transformations across the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry, with 3 major lenses. First is leading validation execution for enterprise transformations such as ERP or QMS transformations, enabling process transformations, and also executing end-to-end validation managed services. Maybe I'll hand to Anirudh for his intro.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sid. Hello, everyone. My name is Anirudh, and I have a combined industry and consulting experience of over 11 years now. I am a senior manager at PwC, and for the past 4 years, my focus has been delivering execution and validation of complex systems such as ERP, QMS, PLM, supporting our clients in adopting leading practices such as CSA, GAM5 methodology, and things like that, And these days, I'm supporting our clients getting ready for this AI wave, and really excited to talk to you guys a bit more about that. So I'll pass on to Amy next.
Thanks, Anirudh. Hey, folks. So Amy Wilhite here. I have about 10 years experience in the validation industry. In total, the last 6 of those years being here at Kneat, doing digital validation of the processes brought to us by the life sciences customers that we have in our base. Those customers having processes ranging from CQV to CSV, CSA, process val methods, having all of those validation processes mapped out in a digital solution. And then the 4 years prior to that were directly in the manufacturing and validation of biologics and cell culture produced drug substances here in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, where I'm at here in the biotech hub. So happy to be on this call with you guys.
Awesome.
And I'll hand it back over to Sid then.
Thanks, Amy. No, that's great. Team, I know James gave a quick overview of this, but we want to talk to you about 3 things for the rest of this discussion before we go into Q&A. One, start off just with a quick review of impact that we're seeing from AI on the pharmaceutical and life sciences industry, but also, more importantly, some of the adoption that we've seen from a regulatory perspective, from an industry perspective, et cetera. We'll talk a little bit more about how we've seen AI's influence and help in reshaping CSV. I know that's probably the topic that matters most for all of us. And then we want to spend a little bit of time talking about a use case or a success story covering some of those same aspects. I'm not going to spend too much time repeating why I think this conversation matters across the pharmaceutical industry, right? We're seeing, I'm sure everybody on this has already seen evidence of AI tools or capabilities being infused across the value chain and across various types of products. I think safe to say, right, we're seeing a significant amount of increasing investment year over year in AI-based tools, AI-based capabilities, AI-enhanced processes, and we're only going to continue seeing that grow. I mean, we have lots of evidence of that across the board. But I think what matters most for us is AI's impact on validation, compliance, and kind of maintaining that state of compliance. I'm sure many of the folks joining, as we saw in the poll, right, are already taking their first few steps or maybe already well matured into their adoption of both AI and CSA. We've seen evidence of companies across the board who are launching their own internal digital validation initiatives. But I think equally importantly, or perhaps more importantly, regulators and industry groups are also enhancing their same recommendations and guidances. Maybe just a quick walkthrough, right? As early as 2023, the FDA released their discussion paper on artificial intelligence and digital manufacturing. They called out expected challenges of validation of new systems that will shake up or challenge our current validation approaches, right? Requiring robust testing, data-driven approaches, bias analyses, or even explainability reviews. There's definitely challenges that were called out previously on managing continuous changes and updates with our traditional change control approach, which is comparatively a little more static. And of course, the ever-present issue of maintaining traceability and auditability of this data, especially now that it might be AI generated or AI influenced. And on top of all of that, being able to continue explaining that same data that might be generated, input into, or processed by those AI systems. That evolution has only continued over the last couple of years. And within this year, we've seen a few important items come out, right? Earlier this year in January, the FDA issued their new guidance on considerations for the use of AI to support regulatory decision making, right? And you'll hear similar threads through all of these, but they called out the importance of adopting a risk-based credibility framework, right? Defining context of use, which is a great similar through line to the concept of intended use that we found in the transition to CSA. I'm sure that's something everybody's already been hearing about. But also about assessing model risk, building appropriate plans according to the same, leveraging fit-for-use data, right? They talked about the criticality of using high quality and representative data sets in testing and usage, right? Safeguarding against bias, another similar through line, by leveraging or checking that data reflects the relevant patient, manufacturing, what have you, population. And again, they underlined that validation rigor should align with the model's level of risk. Now, we actually see that similar thread pop up in ISPE's new GAMP guidance for AI. It was published just this past July, right? They also talked about or focused on implementing and applying a risk-driven, fit-for-purpose approach for both designing and validating AI-based tools. They talked about the need for robust governance models with defined roles and responsibilities, appropriate oversight of, say, vendor-supplied AI components, or even just clear documentation across the board for development and validation artifacts. And then again called out the importance of continuous monitoring and oversight once these tools are operationalized, to do things like monitor drift, build in maintenance periods, plan for potential enhancements or improvements, especially in the face of, say, new data inputs. And the last one, and I'll maybe turn to Amy after this, I'm sure everybody is aware of the EU AI Act. They have an upcoming deadline in August 2026 to implement their new rules around high-risk AI systems. Again, fortunately, we're seeing the focus area requirements mirroring what we're already seeing being called out by the FDA, these guidelines from ISP. I know EU's AI Act came out earlier, but I think the through lines are really important call out, and that's the need for that risk-based validation approach, right? Incorporating risk classification into your assessments, applying a relevant level of validation rigor and depth. They called out the need for enhanced transparency and relevant documentation, again, to cover data sets, those summaries, the approach for compliance and ongoing monitoring, the approach for enhancements, your approach for change controls alongside this, and appropriately, strong governance structures that might be in place. Maybe before I talk about kind of what this matters, maybe Amy, I'll turn over to you, right? I'm sure you're seeing similar things.
Sure. Yeah. So this has been coming up a lot lately. More so, pretty suddenly, pretty fast, right? A lot of our customers have expressed interest in utilizing AI technologies in the systems and having everything in a digital, the entire digital maturity pathway that's been going on for years now is basically enabled this entire AI approach. So it's very attainable, based on all the infrastructure that's been put in recently. And a lot of customers, a lot of people in the industry are just like ready to jump on board and start using AI, but they don't even have AI, SOPs about how their company is allowed to use AI. They don't have a plan in place for how they plan to validate AI. And a lot of them aren't even using CSA as their validation approach for computer systems yet, which is going to be a big blocker for them when they're trying to do AI validation, which is even more difficult inherently than a regular computer system. So we really are trying to get everyone on board with CSA so that we can align and get on board with what is needed from an AI validation perspective.
Yeah, I think seeing so much of the guidances, the new standards coming out being heavily anchored to that risk-based approach just like underlines the importance of taking that first step, right? And using that, both a transition to CSA and initial digitization and validation as an enabling force to prepare yourself for this AI wave. I really like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like Amy said, there's a lot of movement that's already happening towards this adoption. We're seeing it across the board, across a number of different functions, and we're already seeing AI augmented tools move from those proof of concepts that we saw earlier 2020 to becoming standard practice for a lot of companies already in 2025. Right? Things shift so quickly. Maybe we'll shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about what this kind of means for all of us, right? As those responsible for maintaining the state of validation or state of compliance. We see really three impacts from all of this. One is the readiness to validate these AI systems, whether it's AI-enabled tools, internal or external, there is a need to adapt validation processes to be ready for this wave, as Amy called out, right? Digitizing your platforms, taking that first step towards CSA, or diving further deeper into adopting a risk-based approach will be necessary. And I think it's the important call out here, right? It's not just about validating the systems that might use AI. It's really about validating the AI within those systems. The second piece there is we really anticipate, and I'm sure this is already happening for a number of folks, is there will be a call to action to deliver efficiency within internal processes using AI to enhance validation activities, validation processes, and that's really like leveraging Gen AI to streamline some of the activities that we do. And then the last one, this is more generally, but being ready to upskill your team members for appropriate AI usage, for appropriate AI governance, right? Your teams should be able to confidently adopt and govern or even recognize AI-based tools. Are your SOPs appropriately updated to call out those same oversight roles, the same roles and responsibilities that we're already hearing about from the FDA, from ISPE, et cetera? Maybe I'll pause here. I'll transfer over to Anirudh. He'll talk a little bit about items 1 and 2 and some of the things that we're already seeing in industry.
Yep. Thank you, Sid. Hey, everyone. So, as we know, like Sid was mentioning, the traditional CSV processes have been too manual, too static, too document heavy to keep up with the pace of the AI driven innovation. And you will see on the left what we have highlighted are some of the major challenges we have seen across these two areas: readiness to validate AI systems and efficiencies through the AI powered CSV. And on the right, you will see the AI driven solutions and our analysis that we have seen. So I'll pick one example in each of the areas, starting with the readiness to validate AI. One of the common challenges what we have seen is lack of the real time monitoring and traceability. What it leads to is no continuous assurance, and there so many times the drifts going undetected, meaning the drifts as in whenever the input data starts behaving differently after a consistent use and gives the poor quality outputs, they turn into drifts, and they're not meeting the intended purpose of the AI tool. In order to address this, some solutions that are offered are real-time model monitoring, drift alerts, or drift detection tools that will provide the continuous assurance and ensure the system is performing as expected. There are certain regression testing in place to ensure it is providing the desired outputs. What we have seen using these models or solutions is around 50 to 70% reduction in undetected issues. Then I would also like to talk about another example on how we can introduce efficiencies through AI. One very common example I want to pick is the static document centric processes, right? Which, as I was talking about earlier, being too manual, document heavy, and what we have seen is the use of AI that by developing tools like NLP driven document generation or smart SOP management solutions. These would help us prepare, the summary reports, some of the other validation documents, and speed up the validation, the documentation processes. And what we are seeing is around 30 to 50% reduction in the documentation prep, the review cycles, and in this area. And keep in mind that these practices are enabled by the safeguarding procedures, like human in the loop is definitely kept here, and introducing appropriate governance. So we are seeing similar challenges and AI solutions across the validation lifecycle. And maybe let me ask, ask Amy here, like what you have seen in the industry outside of some of these examples, and maybe you can share some of your thoughts and inputs.
Yeah, sure. So we're definitely seeing a big uptake in the different use cases that you can have available for AI platforms. It's just like any other computer system where you may have developed the system in-house and you're designing your own AI, or you may be selecting the system from a pre-established vendor. and you're looking for the technologies that already exist that are available, commercially from a vendor perspective. And so a lot of our customers are actively looking at vendors that have AI, that they can easily integrate with systems like, their existing quality management systems, their existing digital validation platforms like Kneat, that may already be open to API configurations and integrate with those. And the solutions that they're looking for include things that they can already use based on what's available in those platforms. So customers already have digital libraries full of their SOPs. They already have them full of their requirements and their specifications for their various systems that they have. They already have entire libraries of test cases that they've been executing digitally for years now. So it's pretty easy to feed that information to an AI and then have that AI generate you something that's very similar to what you've already been producing. So the control there is to, even though those technologies exist, is to make sure that they are being validated properly and used, ethically for the system. And that's kind of the challenge that we see is customers see the technology, they know it's available, they want to use it, but they're not sure exactly what they have to do internally to adopt it. So there's lots of technologies that already exist, and we've seen customers actively starting to integrate some of those things, in their sandboxes and their development instances and things like that to get their heads around it from a development perspective. And it works, and it looks pretty good. So just the barrier that exists in having that deployed to your production systems is the level of validation that is needed based on the complexity of how autonomous the system and the information is going to be, and the level of design control that you had on it. Some systems are black box, and you can just get them and rely on your vendor, and that's not going to be necessarily something that you can do for AI.
No, that's true, right? Those safeguards are completely necessary, and I love the call out there, Amy. Right? One is, what is the intended use of each of these tools? What is the level of human involvement that's expected for each of these tools, especially if you're implementing them for internal processes, right? We can't lose sight of that review, oversight, and approval responsibility that lies with compliance professionals, and then also those considerations on data safeguards, right? We have to make sure being cognizant about the data that's being used or where it's going. No, that's a great call out.
Yeah, definitely. And also appropriately introducing, the risk assessment when dealing with the data, introducing like how the identifying the areas that are unique to AI, performing the risk assessment and having the mitigation strategies in place. Along with that, like I was talking earlier about the drifts as a good example, ensuring we have monitoring and the training practices in place. Those are the key areas we should be thinking about. Maybe maybe this is a good segue to get into the next slide that I had. I wanted to talk the team through how one of the clients where we have helped actually validate an AI enabled QMS solution, and how the solution we are just talking about right now played in action. So the client that was looking we were working with was looking to evolve their siloed on-prem legacy quality management system to the AI-enabled QMS, and that was being deployed over 20 sites. Not just that, the client was also looking for a CSA-aligned AI validation approach that we can help validate this new system without unnecessarily burdening the new active resources. So we came in, looked into their procedures and developed an AI integrated framework that helped support their validation activities. And like I was just talking, we introduced monitoring and retraining practices into their deliverables, help bolster their risk assessment policies to account for AI specific challenges and accounted for human in the loop alongside the GXP impact and the system complexity. Another thing we did there was talking about the as you were talking about the efficiency, right? So we did develop a GPT enabled AI solution to help streamline their script generation practices. The results we saw were really great. What we saw was around 20 to 30% reduction in script timing and faster reviews. And also, we went ahead and drafted the test scripts for around 100 business processes and 500 plus requirements. Another big improvement that we saw using this AI enabled solution was which is harder to quantify, is the script consistency. So whenever we are working, as you all know, when working with these, drafting these 100, 200 scripts, right, it's really difficult to manage the consistency across all the scripts, the writing styles and things like that. So this really helped us achieve the script consistency, ensure GDP practices, and help reduce the scripting errors drastically. So yep, that was a great case that we saw, and yeah, I wanted to share this with the group here.
Yeah, thanks, Anirudh. I think a couple call outs there, right, is one, the usage of AI tools within the scripting process had to be controlled pretty carefully, right? We had to be careful about what data is being exposed to this tool, right? Things like format, structure, consistency are great, but we have to be careful about introducing any process specific information or actual execution specific information into this tool. The other part of that is the validation framework used for this. The big first step, and I think, Amy, this will resonate for a lot of the things that you've been saying, is taking an appropriate risk assessment, identifying the usage, the intended use, or the context of use for the AI capabilities, both implemented within the solution and utilized to actually accelerate the process themselves, and managing those accordingly. And building appropriate plans around the same for future enhancements, for monitoring, etc. For the test scripting tool itself, after so many usages, we found ourselves going back and doing a little bit of retraining in the flow to avoid some potential drift, to avoid changes that we might see in basic things like format. I don't know, Amy, if you've seen similar use cases or any other thoughts here.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's kind of it's kind of a two-headed monster, whether or not you're utilizing a tool that already exists to provide this for you versus developing something in-house. Using a tool is obviously convenient. You maybe don't even have to have that much training data for it because it's already using an LLM that's been designed specifically for that process. But a lot of the AI technologies, they're being hosted on a cloud to reach the server, capacity to have the brain power to answer the question that you just asked or develop the deliverable that you just wanted. So that's online, and you have to have really good data management practices and non-disclosure agreements, and you have to ensure that they are handling the destruction of that data in a certain way, the sharing of that data in a certain way, and the access that they're going to have of that in a certain way, because I'm sure that tool has folks there who can help you troubleshoot, who would be given access to that information if they needed to go in and help you with something with that tool as a vendor. So all of that has to be decided and worked out if you're going not in-house as your solution.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's a great call out. Yeah. Maybe this would be a good time for us to pause and switch over to Q&A. That was the main bulk of our kind of presentation aspect, but maybe this is a good time for us to see if there's any questions that the team has.
Certainly. Hi, Sid. Thank you for that presentation, Sid, Anirudh, and Amy. That was very enlightening, and based on the chat and the Q&A here, very interesting to a lot of people. So we do have several questions here. We're going to answer as many questions as we can live. We've got a good chunk of time left in our hour time slot, so I'll go ahead and put questions up. We'll answer as many as we can live. Feel free to keep putting your questions in for the audience, and any that we aren't able to get to for any reason, we will follow up with individually afterwards. I'll make sure that our panel here answers the questions, and a Kneat representative will reach out with the answer. So we'll start here. We're going to start with the most popular. So if there is a question you want answered, go ahead and go into the Q&A and upvote it. Just click on that little thumbs up icon. So first question here is from Daniel. Given the FDA's CSA proposal is still in draft and specifically only applies to the MD industry, when do you estimate that this new approach will become, let's say, a cornerstone in pharma?
That's a great question. I it's hard to estimate when a specific guiding regulatory body is going to change its or update its guidances. But our recommendation is, rather than waiting for this to become a cornerstone or waiting for this to become an upcoming item, it's worth preparing and incorporating some of the through lines that we're already seeing, right? We've talked about the importance of establishing appropriate governance structures, establishing appropriate safeguards for the usage of AI, whether it's just an overall framework for responsible usage, making sure you're safeguarding data. I may have said that already. And then incorporating that as a starting point, an appropriate risk-based approach. I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to say, this you have this many years left, but the EU AI Act right around the corner. We have 1 year left. I don't see a better time to start than now. Anirudh, Amy, I'll take your guys' input on this one too.
Makes sense, right? I mean, we don't know, but to your point, right? And we have seen a lot of interest in the clients thinking about it and adopting these new approach, the CSA based models and the AI, these AI guidelines that are coming in. The clients are interested in learning more about it, such as you guys, and thinking about how we can get prepare ourselves with these guidelines and introduce these policies and procedures into our organization's practices. So I'll maybe let Amy, shed some light here as well.
Sure. Thanks, Anirudh. Yeah, I would say that the readiness for the customers to develop these processes in-house and the readiness or availability of those solutions from vendors is probably two separate areas. I think vendors and service providers and validation solution vendors have those already, and they're already using them for things other than just medical device, for general manufacturing execution, for general labware execution, R&D, all of that stuff. It's already happening. We already have integration requests coming through for those vendors that have those solutions. So developing those in-house and waiting for the guidance to come in on how you should develop it yourself specifically for your business process, maybe a slightly different scope than what the vendors have available for a general commercial perspective.
Yeah, I think a good starting point is really like building these considerations into your risk assessments. I mean, Amy, to your point, right, a number of vendors across the industry are already incorporating AI solutions. I'm sure there's a large QMS vendor that everybody's heard of that they've seen the announcements on AI and usage, right? So it's proliferating the industry.
Excellent. Great discussion there from that question. There's another one here that's rising to the top, and I know it's echoed in a few other questions below as well. But Prasad asks, any tool used for validation needs to be validated itself first. So how do we plan to validate the AI tools? Who watches the Watchmen?
Maybe I can chime in on that one, Sid. Yeah, so ISPE did release some guidance about the validation of AI tools in one of their recent publications. I think Sid there mentioned it already. But there's a pretty good example of the level of validation that is required based on the intended use of the AI platform itself. So they provided a pretty good matrix that scales the level of autonomy that's going to be used for the system versus a level of controlled design that you have exposure to or that you designed yourself for the system, and it ranks up on kind of a matrix scale of having a high amount of autonomy but a low amount of control design versus a low amount of control design and a high amount of autonomy are going to be recommended to be validated in different ways with different levels of complexity. Just like if you kind of think of it like the GAMP categories for computer systems, where you've got like GAMP 3, 4, 5, and it's a lot more validation for a customized level category 5 system than it is for just an off-the-shelf category 3 system. It's going to be the same exact approach. You'll need to have that risk-based approach to assess the exact way that you're going to use that system and then have that control in place for it. But even if you do have like a super great plan, there's still going to be some challenges just because AI is going to be inherently challenging to validate in general due to the fact that there's no real such thing as one specific success criteria for a generated output of like a test script. If the FDA comes through and they are looking at hundreds of thousands of clients and they're saying, yeah, this submission looks great. None of those submissions look the same. So AI is not going to be able to make that look the same for everyone either. It's going to be a variable output, and you'll have to validate around that based on your risk approach for what you want it to be based on.
Yeah, and thanks, Amy. And that's a really great point. These are all great points that you mentioned. And also we need to look at like what we are talking about. Like Sid was mentioning very early on, the intended use of the tool, right? What is the tool being used for? Are we using the tool to introduce efficiencies, or are we actually validating our process that or a system that has AI capabilities in it, like a QMS system we were talking about, right? Depending on, once we have understood the intended use, we need to introduce these safeguarding principles, like introducing human in the loop, and like Amy just mentioned, having the risk based assessment, looking at the data that is being consumed. Is it a public data, internal, restricted, secret? Does it directly impact the patients or product quality or not? And how much reliance do we need on a human in the decision making, depending on the risk of the data? So we look at these certain areas, and based on that determine the risk assessments, and then appropriately develop these practices and policies to validate these systems. And maybe I think, Sid, do you have something to add?
No, I was just going to say, I don't think I could add more without complicating, but really agreed that, right, you should validate these systems, but the level of rigor is what we need to take into account, right? Take that risk assessment, take that view of intended use, and approach these on a case-by-case individual basis.
Excellent. Yeah, all great points, and thank you for answering that question, and thank you for asking that question, Prasad. I know that I just went through and replied to a lot of similar questions as well as we went down beneath. So the next question is jumping around here. Sorry, it is from Kareen. Given the pharma industry's concerns with cybersecurity and data integrity, especially with cloud and AI adoption, how can we ensure that AI systems are secure and compliant with GXP requirements? Sort of a similar question, but a little more here focused on GXP. And GXP is mentioned a lot throughout upcoming questions as well. So touching on this.
Yeah, maybe I can get the ball rolling. Completely agree, right? And this is a pretty complex question. We'll try to avoid answering all parts of it, or trying to unnecessarily simplify. But I think we've called out, right, the need for developing an appropriate risk assessment, identifying the intended usage of these systems, having appropriate design controls where relevant for both development and validation activities that you're going to be doing, building out appropriate security plans, access plans, monitoring, retraining plans, and building your test cases, scenarios, and test data sets accordingly underneath all of that. But there's one other piece, and I think that there's a subtext in this question, which is really good, which is how do you make sure that the data that is being fed into, processed by, or coming out from these AI tools is being controlled to some degree, right? The environment in which your AI tool is being set up should definitely be considered, and that should tie directly to its intended use, right? Access to certain critical pieces of information, confidential pieces of information, or even protected data should be very the access to those, the environment for those has to be controlled very differently and stringently than something that does not interface with a lot of this, something that's more, say, related to formatting of a certain document. And we've seen a lot of use cases of those that can be a lot more flexible. Maybe I'll pause there, see Amy or Anirudh if you have thoughts.
No, Sid, you're making a great point, right? And to what Amy was also mentioning, like, first of all, I mean, the solutions we are talking about, are they custom solutions built by the pharmaceutical organizations, or is it a vendor-based solution? That becomes one thing, right? That becomes one action to check. Looking at the vendor itself, the maturity of those organizations, how robust they are with their AI practices and policies, that also comes into account. And to your point, yes, we need to look at the type of data we are dealing with, like the risk associated with it. Is it a confidential data? Is it a secret data? And things like that. We definitely take a look at that. And based on that, we need to introduce the cybersecurity measures and ensure we safeguard the data.
Yeah, exactly. I think, we've seen with our customers, it used to be not so long ago, maybe about 8 years ago or so, a lot of our customers had in-house server rooms and things so that they could actually support their large applications and their large processing in-house without having to go out to something like an infrastructure as a service provider. It's no secret, that we as a software as a service provider, we are operating, Kneat itself operates in your web browser. So we have controls in place already with operating, online on the cloud and the web, using an infrastructure as a service provider that is compliant with all these practices to be able to confidently let you house all of your GMP, GXP compliant confidential data in a web page and ensure that it's confidential and safe just for you. So other AI solution providers are going to be able to go down that same route, and they just have to make sure that they're selecting obviously their infrastructure as a service provider, their cloud provider, cloud computing provider is one that is, just like you would a normal vendor assessment. You want to make sure that they have a good reputation, they are compliant, they're certified, they have the industry experience to provide such a thing. They are defendable in an audit. All of the same stuff you would do with your infrastructure as a service provider that you would do with your SaaS software as a service provider as well.
That's a great call out. Yeah, it was a great question. I know it requires a complex answer, so we're happy to follow up offline. But James, we'll hand it back to you.
Excellent. Yeah, there is a lot of discussion that goes in between these questions, and I know we can probably sit here for a full day conference just on this one topic. Next question is from Kiet, and it just maybe a little bit disbelief, but are you actually utilizing your AI tool to support GXP regulated processes?
Yeah, the simple answer, yes, but it has, the usage of those, the monitoring, the safeguarding, and all of those have to be taken into account when considering the AI tool used, where in the process it's used, and to what degree that AI tool is exposed to relevant data. So a lot of the use cases that we've been able to use with our clients have to be limited in nature, require appropriate oversight, and operate with limited data exposure. Obviously, for those operating in manufacturing environments, et cetera, if you're operating internally and you have a use case that you can use internally, there's a little bit more flexibility that you'll have. Obviously, that does require a little more investment, a little more time up front, but that opens up the floor for significantly deeper or more complex AI tool usage within your internal capabilities. I know that's a much broader discussion, but let me pause there, see Amy, Anirudh, if you have thoughts.
Sure. Just to back up what Anirudh's been saying, it really comes down to, outside of the data exposure, for feeding information to such a tool, it comes down to the risk that you have for that. It's a pretty low risk to do something like use a tool to generate test scripts, because you're always going to have a human reviewing those test scripts before they go anywhere. You're not going to auto-generate test scripts from an AI and then let an AI go automatically execute those test scripts, via a test script execution, and then go automate, the generation of a validation summary report without ever having a human in any step of that. That's not going to be the process. So the risk is pretty low, because you're always having the human interjection in for the review process, the approval process, to make sure that they have, human eyes on the process at each step before it gets, controlled in any kind of way by the AI tool itself.
Yeah, and to add to your point, Amy, it's always, when working on these AI tools, it's easy to define the industry leading documentation practices and things like that. So AI is very fast and smart when it comes to that, introducing consistencies, ensuring GDP rules and everything. This is how the smart requirement is being built, so we can help use it to generate these good written requirements. So these are some low risk areas that we can definitely leverage, and we know for a fact that there is human in the loop. There is someone who will review those requirements or the scripts, move them into your test management tools, and get them reviewed and approved anyway. So it just helps speed up the drafting process. So it all depends on case by case analysis, looking at different use cases and how we plan to introduce it. And like Sid was mentioning, we need to look at all these three areas to ensure what is it that we're trying to achieve and how much do we need to use these AI capabilities.
Yeah, I think right now, we've seen success with individual or standalone AI tools, right? But there's a complication that comes in when you start considering AI workflows or even AI agents, as Amy mentioned, that are able to string together multiple processes or activities back to back without human intervention. Once you start going down that pathway, that's a much more complex discussion. And I think requires significantly more levels of scrutiny that I think that the industry may be prepared for at the moment. But to be quite frank, that is something that we can expect to be coming, right? We have so many of these open source or publicly available AI service providers that are opening the door for agentic AI for use in your home, right? It's only natural for that to start popping up within the next couple of years within the pharmaceutical industry. I'm definitely getting ahead of myself, and that's a discussion for later. So maybe I'll stop myself and maybe James pass it back to you.
Well, funny you say that, because I do have a question that branches off of that topic really well. So I'll keep you going on that. David asks, what types of AI are we really considering here? I expect that validating a large language model, LLM, is quite different from validating a machine learning model, or Sid, to tie it into what you're talking about, an AI agent. And sort of extrapolating from there, what different types of validation can we be looking at to cover the different types of AI? When we say AI, it's very general. There's a lot of different subtypes that go in there, right?
Yep. Yep. I can chime in on this one real quick. So I think this is something that you would definitely point out as part of your risk assessment. We have Kneat released an ebook in understanding AI in the life sciences recently. You can find it on our website. But we call out specifically 3 kind of levels of validation, and the type of expectations that you would have for validating each one. So we call out rule-based AI, which is just predefined logic, as opposed to machine learning for the adaptive learning process, as opposed to the next level down, deep learning for actual complex pattern recognition. So those would be 3 different levels that you would want to put in your risk assessment to say, hey, I'm only doing rule-based AI. The risk is a lot lower because I don't have this hugely variable set of outputs that I could be expecting, and I have a defined set of acceptance criteria. So therefore, I'm going to do only X, instead of XYZ for your validation. So there are multiple levels. Those are the 3 levels that we're looking at, right now as the most common ones being used in the industry. But definitely they would scale as for the validation burden that needs to be happening for each one. They scale based on the level that you're doing.
Yeah, and to add on to what Amy's saying, like as we are defining these practices and the policies to validate these different type of systems, we are the key thing we look at every time we are looking at any type of model is like, what are the inputs, what are the key outputs? Let's define those. What are the evaluation and performance metrics? Like let's define those thresholds. Like what's considered desired output, what's considered, if it falls outside of that, it doesn't fall, it's not considered a desired output, right? And then also the type of data we select and the governance around it. So these are some of the things we should look at, anytime we are working on these, validating these tools. And then at the end, continuously ensuring and training the data, doing the model training, making sure that the model is learning and giving us the desired results that we are looking for. So we take those 8 couple of things into account as we are working towards validating these models.
Excellent. Sorry, I said, did you have something to add there?
No, I was just going to pass back to you. I know we have about 5 minutes left, so hopefully we can hit one more question.
Perfect. Yeah, we can hit one more question here. This question is from Katie. When using an AI tool to perform automated execution of a protocol, should all data entry cells, which would require data entry during manual execution, should an entry be made by the AI tool to comply with GDP and Alcoa Plus?
That's a really good question.
I believe we need, Sid, let me take a
Yes.
pass at it. Just I'm trying to understand. See, I understand the question. See, the way we should look at it is, where are we introducing these entries, right? If it is if it is done in a testing tool or not. I'm assuming no, right? If you're using a test tool, of course, that's where the agentic AI and these connections comes into play for automated executions. And we should have certain policies and procedures in place to tackle that. And if it is being captured by AI, we should definitely have a verifier introduced as a safeguarding principle to answer your question, like the human in the loop, right? Making sure that the results that have been done are being verified by, and then it goes for the final reviews and approvals. I would say that is how we can make sure that entries are correct, and we are relying on the results and just not completely relying on AI at this point. That's just my initial take. I would let Sid and Amy take a help add on to that.
I think the consideration on Alcoa Plus to have, if you have a tool that's able to execute across an end-to-end script and actually add in data, which is an excellent use case, by the way. I love the thought of that. As a first pass, most definitely. If the tool is able to and able to consistently execute to that point, and you've actually validated it appropriately, to Anirudh's point, the critical piece on that is having sufficient and robust review of those executions, right? I mean, we as validation professionals, pre and post approvals are nothing new, but I think that post approval cycle becomes doubly, triply important in executing appropriately if you're going to be using a use case like this. And also, it might be important to consider the types of test scripts that you're executing. Are you using this for non-GXP relevant test scripts outside of a test tool, or within a test tool? Frankly, are you using these for high risk positive and negative test executions that you're expecting the tool to fully populate and go down across, let's say, a process or back through a process? Those considerations are definitely worth incorporating, because the higher the risk, perhaps the less control that you might want to give to to your AI tool. But the idea is excellent. Maybe Amy, I'll let you.
Yeah, definitely. This actually comes up a lot in digital transformation, like even outside of the concept of AI, because a lot of those Alcoa principles are obviously we've been updating a lot of them now for digital solutions, but a lot of those are taking into consideration what happens on paper, where what happens on paper is you might have a test cell, it's got several rows in it, and you execute all the way across. You can't leave the last row blank because someone could technically come back in the same color pen that you executed, sign something off, and date it retrospectively, and you would never know. Yeah. You can't do that in a digital world. So the risk of having a blank cell in a digital form is extremely low. It's pretty much no risk, because there's no way that information could be put into that cell retrospectively without it being approved by a human to do that. You would have it would be timestamped, it would be dated, there would be a reason for the entry after the fact. And if the document was approved or anything, then it's just locked, and you can't have that level of editing happening after the fact anyways. So that could come down to how your SOP is written, where you could have a risk assessment in place that says blank cells in a digital platform necessarily don't even need to be populated all the way, because it does meet Alcoa with its inherent built-in controls that are made to be regulatory compliant. So there could be ways around that based on how exactly you're interpreting that from the paper-based solution.
The power of Kneat. That's a great point.
The power of Kneat.
I love it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that is all the time that we have for questions here. We're right at the end. So Amy, Sid, Anirudh, thank you so much for the great presentation, the great answers and discussions around this topic. It is clearly a hot and well-interested topic. So we were very glad to hear from our partners over at PwC about their use of AI and how they're changing the game. For more information on that case study and many others, you can find more about that at Kneat.com. But also be sure to follow and check out PwC at their website and on their social media. Sid, Anirudh, Amy, if you are open to further discussion and people reaching out to you, I'll encourage you to put your information in the chat if people can reach out to you. But I'm going to move on here to our thank you slide. Thank you, the audience, for sticking with us for this full hour. It was a great conversation, a great topic. And we want to know more about what you want to hear next from our webinars. So there's this QR code. It'll be provided with a link as well in the follow-up survey, in the follow-up email. You'll get a link to it in the email as well. And you can find this QR code on the slides. Let us know what topics you want to hear next. Let us know how we're doing on the webinars. And keep an eye out for future webinars and future in-person events coming up as well. Follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and X currently. You can get all of the information on our latest case studies, blog articles, white papers, and everything that Kneat is publishing. We try to stay at the top of the thought leadership game when it comes to digital validation. Participate in our 2026 State of Validation Survey. 2025's report just came out a few months ago, and we're already working on 2026. Or just be involved with Kneat and get more information about Kneat GX. All of these things you can do at kneat.com or on our social media. Once again, my name is James Carey, Digital Events Manager for Kneat. We're glad to have you here at our webinar, and we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.